Hey everybody, it's Peter, and this is the 2024 Kawasaki ZX-6R, and it has been tweaked and redesigned for 2024. And in this review, I'm going to tackle some of the criticism that it gets in some of the other videos and some of the other articles, because I think I know where that's coming from. First of all, where are we coming from? We're coming from Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, Jim Gilbert's Power Sports. This is the #1 volume Kawasaki dealer in the country, and they give me complete access to their entire vehicle lineup. So if you have a question about Kawasaki's, I'll be able to get it on here. And one thing I should clarify off the top for you Americans, because you always seem to write when I talk about a Z or a ZX-6R in this case, I'm filming in Canada, so this is the ZX-6R here. It's not what I call it, it's just what it's called because that's how we say Z's and Z's here. All right, let's start from the front here. So I hinted off the top that this bike is receiving a little bit of criticism, at least more criticism than I think is worth it. And I want to talk about where that comes from. First of all, most riders who have reviewed this already have done so at Kawasaki's introductory event, which was at a racetrack. The people that get invited to those racetrack events are people that Kawasaki very much trusts to drive these things at a high rate of speed. It's not the yous and me's of the world. It's a very elite group of journalists that have a lot of race experience, a lot of high speed experience, and they're going to have different critiques on a bike like this, both fairly and unfairly, because they want it to be something that I don't think Kawasaki wants it to be. So we have to place this in 2024. First of all, in 2024, most people that buy this bike, and Kawasaki knows that, they don't take it to the racetrack every day. Those that do almost never leave it in stock condition. So if you're going to race this bike as your primary race bike, and that's really what it's made for, you're going to modify it, and probably some of the criticisms that this has gotten don't matter. If you're not going to race it and you're going to ride it on the street, which is what a lot of Kawasaki ZX bikes have done now, even for 2024. You've got the ZX-10, it's got cruise control. You don't need cruise control on a racetrack. Those are street-focused figures. You've got this bike, it's got some street-focused stuff, and you've got the ZX-4 now, which is another 4-cylinder that's new last year. It's also street-focused. All of them are track-capable, but some of the things that are going on with this bike is made for riders like you and like me, and I think it's getting some unfair criticism from the journalists. So let's go through this bike bit by bit, and I'll talk about some of the things that are fair and unfair about those reviews. So starting out here at the front wheel, if you've seen my video reviews before, you'll know that this is where I always start, because you can start to see who this bike was intended to serve by looking at the front wheel. Now this one might be a little bit misleading from looking at the front wheel. This looks very much race capable. So a couple differences for 2024. You used to have the pedal style discs in here. You don't have that anymore. Pretty much Kawasaki's moved away from those. Every bike they redesigned now has the full round discs again. They used to tell us that those pedals help dissipate heat. The reality is it just is something that probably differentiated Kawasaki from a looks department, and they're going back to the round rotors here. So that's pretty much standard stuff. Of course, dual rotors. This bike does have ABS. The ABS ring is on the far side here. It's not just regular ABS though. It's Kawasaki Intelligent Brake analog brake system. So Kawasaki's, it's KIBS is what they sort of the short form for it. Now the big key with this is this bike does not have an IMU. That's something I thought they would have put in the redesign. They didn't. I don't know that it matters for most riders of this bike, but you still have some intelligent braking system. So instead of just pulsing the brake as soon as it senses one of the wheels locking up, instead of just pulsing the brake at a sort of a standard rate, what this is capable of doing is it can monitor like the brake pressure, throttle position, the engine speed, the clutch actuation, and the gear position, all of which are going to affect your deceleration rate. So as it sees how the bike is decelerating from both brakes and engine and everything else, it senses exactly how much and how to activate the basically the ABS. So what it does is you feel much less intervention at the lever, and that makes it better for high speed. A lot of people like to take the ABS off on their race bikes because they don't like the intervention. This is an ABS system that a lot more people will leave on the racetrack. It is just a more advanced system than many of them out there. You can get this bike without ABS if that's what you want, so you have that option, but the ABS that comes with it is a very, very good, very high-end ABS system for any motorcycle. The rest of the bike is pretty simple stuff. You've got the 17-inch diameter tires. That's pretty standard stuff. That's fully standard stuff. Pirelli Diablo Rosso tires, of course the ZR rated, so high-speed rated. And you know, you can see that large sort of area on the side of the tire here, which does not have any tread at all. So it's essentially a slick when you get this bike leaned way over. So you've got lots of rubber on the road, and that's kind of what you want in a high performance motorcycle. Taking a look a little closer here, you can see typical stuff on a super sport bike, but maybe not something you have on your bike. You've got the radial mount caliper, so again, that's going to add a lot of stiffness. The upside down fork, again, that adds a lot of stiffness up there. You can see the Showa in there. These are high-end Showa forks. Of course, they're fully adjustable. Full adjustability on a super sport bike is pretty much standard for the class. So again, nothing stand out in the class here, but all very good stuff. Let's jump to the heart of this bike now. So of course, the heart of this bike is the ZX-6R engine. You can see the label there in behind there. The engine is basically unchanged, but it has a new camshaft in there. Now, I believe that the only reason there's a new camshaft in there is because you have new emissions regulations and new emissions pieces down here. And basically what that's doing is trying to retain the same horsepower. Now, there are some reports that this is down a tiny bit of peak horsepower. Kawasaki doesn't release their numbers. They've also said it's, matches the horsepower. They also said that the cam gives it more low-end torque and low-end power. And I think this is where some of the controversy comes in from some of these race-style automotive or motorcycle reviewers, is they sit there and say, oh, they didn't bring it and make it more powerful. Well, the reality is they did things in this bike a long time ago that are made for the street rider, not for the racetrack rider. Making it a 636, the idea with that was to add torque down low. That torque down low is something that you only really feel maybe on one turn, maybe two turns of every racetrack where you get it down too low in the revs at a lower speed. Most of the time you're high in the revs on the racetrack. So the reason you have low end torque on this bike is to make it better around town. Now the reason the new camshaft is new is probably because it's very difficult to produce 4-cylinder motorcycles and have them meet sound regulations around the world and emissions regulations around the world. And this bike still does that, so you still have a 4-cylinder super sport bike that meets all those regulations, and that's a really key piece as you move this bike into the future. That's the changes with the engine. Most people have been thrilled with this engine for a long, long time. I think some people were hoping that this would be a massive improvement or a massive jump, and they were excited about something. I think they're letting themselves down by their own expectations, not by the bike. Taking a look at the rear end of this bike, you do have sort of standard stuff. You do have LED signal lights. We'll turn them on a little bit later in the video probably. Coming down here, you can see that sort of exhaust exit shape there, a little triangular type thing. And I do want to talk briefly about the rear tire. Not too much to say. It is a 180 width tire. Some bikes have stretched to 190, and you have 190s within the Kawasaki lineup, but not at the 600cc area. So a 180 series tire, and that's going to help with that flickability, that left-right, real quick flickability. So not quite as wide as something like the ZX-10, but again, very much in line. This bike's made for handling, and that's what it's set up for. So let's talk riding position. Now this is a key piece to a bike like this because a lot of people look at the spec sheet and they say, okay, it's a certain height, therefore it's going to fit me, or it's not going to fit me because I sat on another bike that had this height or that height. This is a relatively high seat, and that's what you need to get that aerodynamic form. But one thing to remember is the width of the front, the width of the bike, width of the front of the seat, the width of the bike, all those things can vary for each individual rider, and it can make the bike easier to reach or harder to reach the ground. So I'm about 6 feet tall, have a proportional body. I'm not sure exactly my inseam. I am flat footing right here with both feet flat on the ground sitting across here. So if you're shorter than me, you're easily going to fit on this. Now the key is you can move a long ways back here, and you can get in this tuck position right down here. Now, I've heard some complaints. I think it was motorcycle.com. Their review says that they couldn't get their elbows tucked in. I'm 6 feet tall. My feet are where they need to be. I can fully tuck in. My elbows are against the tank in front of my knees. So the criticism they gave it, to me, it's just not fair. You can be in that tuck position, and I guess if you're turning a little bit, but I mean, if you're turning that fast, it's all done by leaning. So this bike is a nice compact bike that leans you over. It's not something that you're going to want to do super long tours on, but it absolutely puts you in that race-focused position with that tuck ability to have there. And there is a little bit of a new windscreen here that's going to send the air over your helmet. So aerodynamic tweaks were part of the redesign here. We'll show you the front end in a second. But you can see right down here, my chest is on the tank. I'm tucked in. I've got room to steer. Certainly high-speed steering is not a problem. You're turning more than that, you're driving slow speed, and you're not in a tuck position. So really just compact position, but not something that I think anybody needs to complain about for saying that you can't get in a tuck position. I think that's an unfair criticism. So I spoke about the unfair criticism. Now I'm going to talk about the fair criticism. This bike still has a quick shifter, but it is an up-only quick shifter. It's not an up-down quick shifter. Now, of course, you can set this up so that every tap down is your upshift like they do for race bikes if you wanted it to, but this is an up only quick shifter from the factory the way it comes, which basically means that you can clutchless upshift. So you use your clutch to get into first gear, and then you can clutchless upshift, which is really where you need it on the racetrack, but it does not have a rev matching quick shifter down. So you have to use your clutch going down. The reason I think that's fair criticism when people criticize that is simply because the ZX-4R and the ZX-4RR, in Canada we have the RR and the R, but the ZX-4RR has an up and down quick shifter. The ZX-10R has an up and down shifter. The ZX-6R is up only. If you're going to redesign this bike, it is something I would have liked to see from the factory. Now that can be fixed through the aftermarket, but it's just odd, and I don't think there's really a great reason to not have the up and down quick shifter on this bike. It's kind of an omission that I would have liked to see in the redesign. So that's one thing I think is fair criticism. Now let's talk about some of the things that are new on this bike. So having covered a lot of the things that are relatively unchanged or minor changes, this is what's new. Some of the styling is new. Now to the non-Kawasaki fan, this looks probably a lot like the older bike, but it does have a few new bodywork pieces in here. You do have LED signals now, which you didn't in the past, which at that point was probably no excuse not to have that anymore. You also have new LED headlights. So it had LED headlights before, but they're now redesigned. Even the Ninja 500 has nice LED headlights that have been redesigned, so I expect this to have a nice wider field of view. That was one of the things they did with the Ninja 500, although I haven't driven it at night, haven't seen them at night, so that's just a guess. Over here on the windscreen, you have a little bit of venting in here, which is going to help decrease that pressure, which is going to help you in that tuck position just to have a little bit quieter position. You get the ram air in the front there. Of course, that ram air goes through the bike and into the engine there. So, you know, just a sleeker design, just enough modernized that it doesn't look like it's falling behind some of the other siblings in the lineup, and I say the lineup being the Ninja lineup, that have had some redesign. So good looking bike overall, a little bit more aggression than before, but you know, nothing offensive, very you know, very standard for the class type of styling. The other difference is where it was really needed, and that's the dash. Let's start there. So taking a look at the dash here, one of the things I want to show is you can see sort of the brake fluid container there in the shot, and you can see the dash, and you can sort of see the reflection in there. This is a good TFT display because the camera still has trouble focusing on the display, but you can see this clearly even with the reflection. Again, keep in mind the camera has much more trouble seeing this display than your eyes will. Now, if you were on the if you saw the ZX-6R in the past, you saw sort of the old style gauges. They really had become quite dated even within Kawasaki's own lineup. So now if you're just the ZX-6R fan, you're going to see an entirely new dash. However, if you're a Kawasaki fan, you're going to see that this is the dash that's in a lot of different Kawasaki bikes, and it's really well done. It's a TFT display. What you have here are some differences in technology as well as just the dash itself. So the biggest new thing is you have these ride modes there. So I'm going to cycle through them. I'll show you how I do that a little bit later in this video, just in a minute or so here. But you have a sport mode up top. What this does is it controls on its own the engine, the throttle response. It controls the traction control. It controls the power modes as well. So of course this is full power mode, limited traction control, and also sort of an aggressive throttle setting. If you switch down into the road mode down here, that's your sort of everyday road mode. It still gives you full power at full throttle, but it's a little less twitchy on the throttle, so it's a little bit more road friendly. That's probably where a lot of people are going to ride this. Now I could be reading you wrong, maybe you're going to ride it in sport all the time, but road mode is a little bit toned down as far as a smoother throttle response that makes it just a little bit nicer to drive, especially through city streets. And then you have the rain mode, which of course dials everything down and the traction control up, all in a single setting. So that's kind of a nice feature. You used to have multiple menus on this bike, and now you have a rain mode, road mode, and a sport mode, but you also end up with a rider mode. And as we switch to the rider mode, I want to show you down here, these sections change as well. So right now, power is set to full. That can be, there's two modes that you can have the power in, so it's higher or lower power, and then there's the traction control there, which is set up as whatever you want. So you can see, if you want, you have multiple power modes and multiple traction control modes, and you can set this up exactly the way you want it. So if you had like a race mode that you want to turn traction control fully off and keep it at full power, you do have that option in the rider mode there, or any which way you want. So it does give you a little bit more explanation in the owner's manual, but that's sort of a video review. Other than that, gear indicator, you can invert this daytime or nighttime. I tend to like it with the black background, but you can have everything black white and everything white black if you want. There's lots of things to go through. I'm just going to step out of this mode for a second because I also want to show you what you're getting in the other modes. We're going to bring it back up to the road mode for a second. Down here you can see the odometer right there. So there's 3 options in that section right there. I'm going to click through them right now. There's trip A, trip B, and back to the odometer. So you also always have your temperature gauge visible. The clock is always visible. You can see the fuel gauge there. It's visible with the flashing empty. That means you're empty, and that's just actually a good representation. So when you're on empty, you're not really empty. When the empty starts flashing, that's when you got to be aware that very little bit is there. Speaking of being aware of your fuel, the bike helps you with that. You have your instant fuel efficiency, so that's right now listed in kilometers per liter. You can do liters per 100 kilometers. You can do miles per gallon US, miles per gallon UK. There's lots of options in this dash to set it up for whatever you're familiar with. So that's instant fuel efficiency that you're seeing now. Keep going through. We're going to cycle down. Average fuel efficiency, again, in the same sort of setting there. It's kilometers per liter right now. Then you have your range. So as you start riding, it'll tell you the distance to empty based on how you have been driving. So it's a guesstimate, but it gives you a little bit of an idea. Then you have your average speed, your total time, you have battery voltage, and back to your fuel efficiency there as well. So nice gauge cluster, brings it up to date with the rest of the bikes, and does give you some nice functionality in here. So taking a look at the controls here, one thing you can't see here is there's a little trigger over here that's going to flash your high beams. So that's, of course, typical Kawasaki stuff. And this is all typical Kawasaki stuff. High beams and low beams, if you want to lock on your high beams instead of just flash them, that's how you do it. Signals, horn, four-way flashers, or hazard lights, whatever you want to call them. And then this is the control I was using for multi-purpose. So holding this down, sport is at the very top. So let's assume it was in sport mode. This is your ride mode button. If you hold it down, it'll move up from rider to rain, rider to rain to road to sport, and that's hold it to release, hold it, release. And then going down from sport, you would hold this down for a couple seconds and it'll switch from sport to rider, sport to road, hold it down again, road to rain, hold it down again, rain to rider. So holding this button up or down will switch your ride modes. Pressing it, this will adjust, for instance, the odometer. That was the upper display out of the 2 displays that were adjustable, the odometer, trip odometer, trip odometer. And then down here is the other information, fuel efficiency, instant and average range, time, all those kind of things, battery voltage. So that's a single control that does a lot. The select also helps with your traction control and other systems in there. It's very simple to use is sort of what I'm trying to get at. Sounds confusing in a video, but you very quickly figured out. And the key is you can adjust them on the fly without having to think about it or stare at anything down on your dash. You know what you're doing just by holding it and doing it. So that's kind of nice to have on a bike that's this quick. You can adjust things on the go without having a whole lot of distractions. One thing I should point out here is the clutch lever here. You can just see at the very top of the screen, it is adjustable. It's a little bit different adjustment than on the brake lever, but I'm going to go show you the brake lever just because it's not buried underneath the fairing. When I turn the handlebars, it's a little easier to show, and we'll talk about some of those things right there. All right, so we've switched sides to the throttle side now. There's a kill switch here and a start switch there, and that's it. But you can see the brake adjustment. So first of all, the brake lever is different, and that's because the way it actuates on that brake lever pushes down on the piston there, and that gives you very precise feel. So that's part of the, good power but good feel. And of course, that good feel is important on a bike like this. We're gonna try to zoom in here and see if we can see there's some numbers on here. So this one has 6. Is it more than 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 6. There we go. 6 adjustments. The other side, the clutch lever has 5 adjustments, and you can just sort of pull this out, adjust that wheel, and that is the reach adjustment. Now, the key with that is on the brake lever, yes, it can fit smaller or larger hands, and I got the wrong hand on there, but it can fit smaller or larger hands, but it also, especially important on a race bike, can change that grab point. So if you wanted the grab point to be a little sooner or a little bit later, it's not just about your hand size, it can be adjusted for where you want that grab point to be. And the same thing on the clutch side. So slipper and assist clutch on the clutch side has 5 adjustments on that side, 6 here on the brake side. And again, it can not only fit smaller or larger hands, but it allows you to have that grab point exactly where you want it to just enhance that riding experience. So let's talk about who this bike is for to help you decide if it's right for you. And that's where 2024 things are changing. Things have been changing for a while, but I think it's time to acknowledge that in 2024, this bike has a different purpose than it had back in the, 2000s and that kind of thing. It's moved on quite a bit. So what you have now is not just a pure race bike for the road. We've all repeated that marketing line, and I'm guilty of it myself. This is a race bike for the road. We've all repeated that line for a long time, but the reality is in 2024, if you're taking this to the track on a regular basis, you're making tweaks to it. You just are. You're gonna swap out the exhaust, you may do things with other pieces. It's just, that's what you're gonna find at a race day when you see these bikes out there. There's a lot of tweaks that can be done to this to make it crazy fast, and that's where some of the criticism comes from. A lot of these really high-end riders that work for these magazines and other places I think they are so used to having a variety of different bikes that they want this to be the scalpel they need rather than sort of the multi-tool or that switchblade that has a lot of different functions. This is still a road bike, and you can see some things that work better for road bikes. That rain mode in there is not something you need on the racetrack because you're not racing in the rain and you wouldn't want to kill the power. So having those power modes that are a little more easily accessible in this new dash, that makes a difference. Headlights, the change in the headlight beam, that makes a difference as well. The reason they went to a 636 in the first place was to bring torque down low. What does torque down low do? Like I said, on the track, there might be one, maybe two corners on the track that you benefit from that low down torque, but really torque down low makes more of a difference when you're riding on the roads. This is still a consumer-focused bike that is very, very, very track capable. This thing still sells well to people who want a performance bike, and that, I think, is really who this is aimed at. If you still want a bike that has a fantastic engine, great handling, and now some up-to-date tech, this bike hasn't changed. I mean, Kawasaki knows they've got an engine here that's a winner, so they didn't want to change it too much. They had to make a tweak to make it fit worldwide emissions and sound regulations, and that's where you have with the sort of slight change in exhaust, the new camshaft in there. It's going to feel exactly like the old bike to everybody but the most tuned-in Kawasaki test rider. Now, if you do want this to be a track bike, you can always tweak it, and it can turn into that scalpel that you may want it to be. But really, I think Kawasaki knows their market. They know that these are selling to road riders that want a performance bike that might do some track days, might never see the track, and this bike is still very competitive. It's got the updates that I think you need. It's still a really sweet engine. The only thing that I think Kawasaki made that was a mistake is not throwing that bi-directional quick shifter on there, and it just doesn't make sense to me because the ZX-4RR has it, which is just sitting off screen. The ZX-10RR has it, which is just up the hallway over there. This one does not have the downshifting rev matching, but again, that can be fixed by the aftermarket if it concerns you. Other than that, it's still a pretty great bike and probably one of the class leaders by far to some people. So if that sounds like you, then this bike is for you. If you have any questions, we're going to continue to do Ninja series on this channel. We're going to continue to cover all the Kawasaki bikes. We have a different version of the ZX-4 in Canada than you do in the States. So there's a ZX-4R and a ZX-4RR. We'll cover that soon. I should mention as well with this bike that this bike in this color scheme is the only way you can get it in Canada without ABS. So it would be this color scheme. There's a black and there's also the new, or the, I say new, but the 40th anniversary color scheme, which is available like this. The black and the other color scheme that you'll see on the Kawasaki.ca website, those have ABS. This one has ABS as equipped, but this would be the only color scheme you can get without ABS. So if that matters to you, there's sort of a long-winded version of that. There's your review of the ZX-6R. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.